From the airplane windows, ominous view unfolded. Impenetrable thickets of trees, darkness that seemed to devour everything around. The pilots held the responsibility for the passengers' lives, and they had to make a decision about a forced landing. The plane glided smoothly over the treetops, producing a strange creaking and cracking sound. Upon touching down on the ground, reality struck the passengers with new force. The noise of the landing was deafening, and many of them lost consciousness for a few moments. When they came to, they discovered they were inside a broken plane that had crashed deep into the forest. The dimmed cabin lights only accentuated the grim situation. Passengers began to look around for help and an exit. Before them lay a grim prospect, a long night in the forest, where unfamiliar and frightening sounds filled the air. Time seemed stretched out, and every sound evoked suspicion and terror. A group of passengers gathered together, attempting to unite their efforts for survival. Among them were diverse individuals, from businessmen and students to the elderly and children. Their leader was David, an experienced traveler with a composed demeanor. He suggested sending a small group in search of help on the nearest road. With each step through the dense forest thickets, passengers felt their fear grow. Indistinct shadows moving amidst the trees caused shivers and paranoia. The sounds of the night were so intense that it seemed as if the forest was coming alive with its own fears. Soon, it became clear that they were not alone in the woods. The group came across strange tracks of bent trees and soil, as if something huge and mighty had passed through recently. The passengers' nerves were on edge, and many began to doubt the wisdom of their choice to seek help. The night in the forest proved restless and nightmarish. Unfamiliar sounds became stranger and more threatening. Muffled cries and moans were increasingly heard, as if the forest was living its own life. The group had to make camp right in the heart of the dense forest, unaware of what might await them in the darkness. Morning brought relief, but also new horrors. One of the passengers had disappeared, and no one could explain what had happened. The remnants of the plane had also suffered further degradation, as if someone or something had been dismantling it piece by piece. Fear and despair intensified, and the group realized they had to uncover the secret of this forest in order to escape alive. The search for an exit grew more desperate, and passengers began noticing increasingly strange phenomena. People from their own ranks began to vanish, and the tracks led to even denser and more sinister parts of the forest. It seemed as if the forest itself was trying to hold them, engulfing them in fear and despair. With each new discovery, it became clear that the forest concealed dark secrets. The entity dwelling within its depths was something inhuman and ominous. They were confronted by an ancient force that fed on fear and weakness, attempting to keep each of them in its grasp. The group of survivors, after enduring numerous trials and terrors, decided to resist. They found a way to unite their strengths and pave a path between death and this nightmare and the hope of rescue. The inner strength of each of them became a weapon against the sinister influence of the forest. Through trials and horrors, they found a way out of the darkness. The plane, thought to be long lost, was finally discovered, and the passengers managed to send a distress signal. The forest no longer resisted. Its dark forces faded away. Their rescue became a story of horror and the power of the human spirit. They had survived a nightmare that had seemed insurmountable, and they had chosen the path toward light and salvation. Turbulence in the darkness left an indelible mark on them, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, an incredible force of will resides. The evening flight on a small regional airplane seemed like an ordinary story. The sky was clear, the sun had already disappeared below the horizon, and stars were slowly appearing in the night sky. Hundreds of miles separated the passengers from their destination, and everything seemed to be proceeding as usual. However, none of them suspected that this flight would turn into a nightmare. Among the many passengers seated in comfortable chairs, there was one who noticed something strange. A middle-aged man, dressed in a stylish suit, couldn't help but notice the figure in the rear seat. It was a man surrounded by an aura of mystery and antiquity. He was dressed in long black garments resembling an ancient costume from a bygone era. But the most peculiar thing was his face, pale, almost marble-like, with eyes that glimmered with strange sparks. The stranger smiled silently, as if he knew secrets hidden from everyone else. A passenger named David Coldenty tore his gaze away from this enigmatic figure. His inner voice screamed at him not to pay attention, but curiosity prevailed. He decided to try and strike up a conversation with the stranger to alleviate this strange restlessness in his soul. "Hello," David said, smiling. The stranger only nodded in response and continued to smile silently. "Where are you headed?" David attempted to continue the conversation. However, the stranger showed no interest in talking. He remained focused on something of his own, ignoring David's attempts to start a dialogue. The mysterious aura around him only intensified, and David felt that something was amiss. With each passing minute spent in the presence of the stranger, David became increasingly nervous. He noticed that flight attendants, when passing by his seat, did so with an odd haste, their gazes avoiding his direction. Other passengers seemed not to even notice his existence, as if he were invisible to everyone. But the strangest thing happened when David got up from his seat to go to the restroom. When he returned to his seat, his heart stopped. The place where he had just been sitting was empty. On the floor lay only an old scroll wrapped in fabric. David slowly picked it up and examined it closely. The scroll was adorned with some strange symbols, written in dark ink. It was incredibly mysterious and unsettling. Fear gripped David. He returned to his seat, trying to understand what was happening. He began to question the flight attendants about whether they had seen the strange man in the rear seat. Their answers were vague and evasive. The flight attendants seemed to be hiding some terrible secret. Finally, the captain of the airplane approached David. He looked tense, as if struggling to rise above his fears. In a hushed voice, he told David a horrifying story connected to this airplane. Exactly 13 years ago, on the same day, at the same time, a series of mysterious deaths occurred on board this flight. People died in horrifying circumstances, and all of them were seen near that very strange man who smiled silently. After each tragedy, he vanished as if evaporating into thin air. "We call him Passenger 13, the captain whispered, his eyes gleaming with fear. "No one knows who he really is or how he has connected to these dreadful deaths." David felt his survival instincts kick in. He realized that he was trapped amid horrors associated with this enigmatic stranger. He understood that he had to unravel the secrets of the past to survive and uncover the dark truth hidden in the shadow of Passenger 13. The wind pierced the March morning with its cold breath as a group of friends gathered at an old railway station near an abandoned airport. Their destination was an unusual journey, a tour of abandoned places with mystical histories. Among the group were Linda, a young paranormal investigator, Michael, an unyielding skeptic, Julia, an adrenaline junkie, and Denny, a seasoned adventurer. Their next stop was an old, abandoned airport, where a derelict plane stood. The legend spoke of a plane with a mysterious history, the Soul Storm. In the 1970s, a series of enigmatic events occurred on board this plane. No passengers or crew survived, and the plane was discovered days later in an impenetrable forest. Approaching the plane, the group felt an incredible tension in the air. Gathering around the enormous fuselage, it was hard for them to imagine the tragedy that had taken place there. Windows were shattered, metal was covered in rust, and tree branches intruded inside, as if trying to shield something dreadful. "Look," someone asked sitting in the back seat. Denny whispered, pointing to a plane window. They approached closer and saw a man in a dark jacket eerily glued to the window, as if lifeless, his eyes completely white. Michael, who was once skeptical, now full of dread, decided to dig deeper. He started studying the history of the plane and the mysterious events tied to its disappearance. Soon, it became clear that passengers began to see horrifying visions before the plane vanished. Could it be that the legend of the Soul Storm isn't just a tale? Linda speculated. Maybe something supernatural really happened on this plane. The skeptics believed that the terrifying visions were merely products of passengers' imagination and their anxious thoughts. But as the day drew closer to evening, darkness began to envelop the group. And then it began. Severe turbulence shook the dilapidated plane, as if its very soul quaked with anger. Passengers struggled to hold on to the broken seats, but staying in place was a challenge. The light suddenly went out, plunging everything into darkness. And the vision started. Linda saw a woman weeping in the back seat, her despair so vivid that Linda almost heard her cries. Michael witnessed a man with a bewildered expression, trying to find an exit from the lost plane in the forest. Julia saw a shadow in the rear row, approaching her, and even later felt a chilling touch on her neck. Each of the friends experienced their own terrifying visions, each as real as if they were present in the past. The turbulence and visions continued until the plane finally came to a halt, and the darkness vanished as if it had never been. Hearts raced wildly, and the friends found themselves in complete silence. Everything around them was as it was before the wrecked plane, the abandoned airport, but something was different. They were no longer alone. Shadows surrounded them, the ghostly figures of passengers who had perished on this plane. "We were here with them," Linda whispered, her voice trembling. The friends felt the cold seeping into their bones, and whispers filled the air as if the shadows were trying to convey their stories through the walls of time. They learned about the lives of the passengers, about how they ended up on this cursed plane. Their souls were trapped here, unable to find peace. Skeptical Michael, now consumed by terror, attempted to leave, but his path was blocked by a shadow. "We cannot leave," echoed in his mind, as if it were not his own voice. "We seek justice. We seek vengeance." The friends realized that the souls of the deceased passengers were imprisoned on this plane, seeking revenge for their deaths. With each passing minute, the visions grew more intense, and the friends understood that they had to confront a dark and unknowable force that had cursed this plane. The forces of darkness attempted to take over their minds, playing on their fears and vulnerabilities. The friends battled their own nightmares, trying not to drown in this ocean of horror. They realized that they needed to unite their efforts to stand against this force and find a way to free the souls of the deceased. Hours seemed endless, but finally, the friends found a way. They managed to cross the thin line between the world of the living and the world of spirits, conveying their thoughts to the souls of the deceased. They begged them to stop seeking vengeance, to end the cycle of fear and hatred. Finally, the shadows began to agree, and their darkness began to dissipate. The plane began to slowly fade away, and with it, the ghosts disappeared. The friends were left alone, standing on the same tarmac as before. They knew a long journey back awaited them, but now they were certain they had overcome the darkness and restored peace to the departed. Their story became a cautionary tale, a testament to how strong emotions and vengeance can curse not only an individual but also a place that witnessed their horrifying deeds. And even though this plane was ruined and abandoned, its mystical history would forever remain in the memories of those who dared to embark on this deadly turbulent flight.